Okay, so let's talk about IPOR AMM V2. More specifically, let's focus on the base spread modeling calculation. And the reason why we call base spread is because this is the part of the spread before taking into account the market demand and other components on the pricing step. Cool. Okay, so let's jump into IPOR AMM V2 base spread calculation. So I'm going to split this quick presentation in two steps. So first I'm going to talk about like how we are doing, like what do we do when we are pricing the base spread. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining like why did we choose to go through this route. Does it make sense? Cool. So, okay, so what do we do, right? I split in 5 steps. How we are pricing. So let's go one by one, right? So first one is the most simple, but it's very important to understand what's going on. So first we choose a token, right? So let's say we're choosing USDT and we're going to model on USDT. The key takeaway of this step is to understand that each token has its own set of parameters and calibration process, right? So right now, IPOR has 3 tokens, right? IPOR DAI, IPOR USDC, and USDT. So which means that we're going to have 3 different models. So that's the key takeaway here on the first step is like each token has its own model. The second step is splitting the data that we're going to use for the modeling into 3 steps. That's very, very standard. It's the idea that having a set of data that we're going to do the calibration of the model, and the other one that it's some sort of validation, right? The testing to make sure that the model has it's a sanity check on the model side, right? So this step usually what we do is, let's say here is our USDT, IPOR USDT data, right? So usually USDT has like a somewhat well-behaved IPOR rates and then jumps to very high and then goes down, right? So USDT is really like famous for these spikes on the rates. So what we do on this split and calibration, it's very, very straightforward. So we basically just like find a point in time where we use the past to do the calibration, and then we use this piece of the data for some testing as the sanity check piece of the modeling. So that's the step 2. On the step 3, we do that's where the actual modeling starts. So the first step that we're going to do, we're going to be clustering different points on IPOR rate. By the way, let's pretend all this here is the calibration, right? Calibration. Let's pretend that the testing is like here in the future, right? So if this is the whole calibration step, so the first step that we're going to do is to cluster the IPOR rate and the market conditions into different regions, right? And that's what I've done here with these colors. So the regions, we could choose different ways to split the data. Let's pretend we're going to choose, and the reason why I'm saying let's pretend, we've done like many types of iterations. One of them could be volatility, for example. So let's split this particular data set in high volatility, low volatility, and let's say medium volatility, right? So what we're going to do, we just go through the data, and then as we go like point by point, we find out that this region turns out to be a low volatility, this region turns out to be a high volatility, and this one turns out to be a medium volatility range. So that's what we do first on this step, really clustering this like set of points into groups, right? So in clusters, that's why the name comes from. So okay, so that's the step 3. We really like get the data and split into parts. In this particular example, happen to have 3 different groups. The 4th step is fitting a linear regression based on the parameters that we are using for each group, right? So here there would be a linear regression, like we can think that would be a model. And then on the white part, there would be another one, and the orange data point, there would be another one. So you can imagine that these step 3 and 4 can give rise to many models, right? Because we are using volatility as an example. But we could imagine that we had, instead of 3 regions, we could have 4 or 5. Instead of having only volatility, we could have volatility and maybe distance to the mean, right? Or only just using some sort of moving average level, for example, to split between the points. So there are multiple choices that we can make just on step 3. And then on step 4, also we can have multiple choices we can make, like which set of parameters are we going to use to fit the linear regression. That's also choices that we can make on step 4. So the step 5 is really going through all these iterations between combinations on step 3 and 4 and find what is the best model from these steps, right? And then, of course, best has a number of connotations that we have to be very, very, very careful. And also, depending on the lag, if it's pay fix, receive fix, we may choose different versions. So, for example, one thing that we are considering on the pay fix side for USDT is really getting the model that has like the tightest spread. And that allows us to sift through like hundreds of models and find one that makes sense for that particular curve on that particular scenario. So, but okay, so that's like what we are doing on the modeling side when we are modeling the base spread. The question that I'm gonna walk through now is why do we go through this process? So let's think that our goal on this particular step of the base spread is to price the interest rates swaps as close to fair as possible. And yeah, so that's our goal, right? So if we could have to be a 100% fair price on the base level, that would be the ideal scenario. Of course, we just can't do that because we don't know the future. But let me ask this question, and then this question is going to drive our discussion of why we are doing this process, right? So let's say we knew the future. Let me zoom here a little bit. Let's say we knew the future, right? Exactly block by block of IPOR. My question is, how much should we charge for interest rate swap on that particular IPOR curve? And the answer for this question is the accrued IPOR, right? So what I'm going to do for the last part of this presentation is really discuss what is the accrued IPOR and discuss why accrued IPOR is the answer for this question, right? So, okay, so first point, what is the accrued IPOR? So the accrued IPOR is the compounded of IPOR for like a certain period of time. So let's say accrued IPOR 1 month, right? So let's compound the interest rate, IPOR interest rates for 1 month, block by block. The issue with this is that it's in the future, right? So let's look here as an example, right? So let's pretend that's a very, very simple example, just as a to have like a mental model of what's going on with accrued IPOR. So let's pretend the IPOR rate has this very, very, very fixed behavior here, just as an example, right? So for 2 weeks, IPOR would be at this particular rate. Let's say this is 5%, right? And after 2 weeks, on the very next block, it jumps immediately here. Let's say this is 10% and stays here for another 2 weeks, then goes down immediately on the very next block, back to 5 for again 2 weeks, and then goes back up the very next block. There is no stop in between at 10% for extra 2 weeks. And then just keeps going on and on and on. With this in mind, it's very straightforward to see that the accrued IPOR, right, the compounded of this rate to the whole period would be just the average, right? 2 weeks on 5%, 2 weeks on 10%. Let me make this 10% better. Yeah, there you go. So, okay, so since this is the accrued IPOR, let's compute the payoff of a swap open at this point here, right, at the beginning, right? So the payoff, it's very, very easy to calculate in this case, right? It would be 7.5% minus 5%, so that's 2.5 for the first 2 weeks. On the next 2 weeks, right, the last 2 weeks of the contract, it would be 7.5% minus 10%, which would be minus 2.5%, right? When we put this value here with this together, I mean, it's very easy to see that it's just equal to 0. Right, so the payoff of this contract that would be charged at accrued IPOR would be 0. And that's why I'm saying that this should be the price of the contract, right? We had 2.5 minus 2.5. So imagine that's 7.5. Imagine that we had the contract that was actually 7.4 or 7.6. In this case, the payoff of the contract would be different than 0, which wouldn't be fair if we knew 100% block by block what's going to be IPOR rate for the next 4 weeks. So because of this calculation, that the accrued IPOR is the answer for this question, right? If I knew the future, how much should I charge the contract? And the answer is the accrued IPOR, right? Because otherwise it's just not 0, right? It's just unfair contract. So with that in mind, we really can go back to our goal. And then I want to rewrite the goal slightly different. I mean, it's not slightly, very, very different. But now we understand that it's equivalent. So now, instead of pricing, I want to predict accrued IPOR. And that's why we do what we do on the first part. The reason why we do this splitting, the modeling using clustering, some prediction using a linear regression, is because we are actually trying to predict the accrued IPOR.